Greetings. I'm Scott Hafner, and welcome to the cellar and the video production studio here at Hafner Vineyard. We are delighted that you're with us this afternoon, and we're expecting about 135 patrons and friends for this virtual tasting. We have missed having people visit here this year, and so these virtual tastings have been a wonderful time for us to be connected with patrons and collapse the distance between the winery and your house. And we're just tickled that you're with us this afternoon. We have friends and patrons from all corners of the United States, from New England to New Orleans to Seattle, quite a few people in Oregon today, and a number of people from the Midwest. And so thank you for being with us. A few housekeeping details. Out here in the country, we benefit from a beautiful bucolic setting, but every once in a while the internet connection is a little bit spotty. So if we freeze, just stick with us, have another glass of wine, and things will pop back in a few seconds. We have the benefit of knowing that you're there, but we can't see you nor hear you. So you can be as vocal and rambunctious as you want, and you have no fear of disturbing the tasting. Let's see. In addition to friends and patrons from all over the country, we're also glad that the founding partner of Hafner Vineyard, also known as our father, is joining us, watching from his iPad up the hill. So we'll be on our best behavior, because even after 40 plus years, you're still on probation. And we're grateful that Dad is with us participating today. Let's take a look at the curriculum that Kate has organized. These are the wines that we'll be tasting today, and we encourage you to start, if you have not already, to enjoy the Chardonnay. We put this tasting together because of two releases that became available in mid-September, the 2019 Chardonnay and the 2017 Next Red. And many annual tasting program patrons chose to add the previous vintages as a way to sort of see how our Chardonnays and Next Reds age. So we'll be tasting the 2017, 2018, and 2019 Chardonnay, as well as the 2010, 11, 14, and 17 Next Red. And please begin and start to make determinations about what you find in the wines, in the Chardonnays, how you might describe them. We'll ask you some questions about that. And we're always interested in what people's favorite wine is. So there'll be some questions that you'll have to answer. This is not a free ride. Park is going to tell us a little bit about when to start harvest. We'll be tasting the Chardonnays. Park and Sarah will take you through that. We'll take a look at the 2021 Chardonnay harvest so far, and also talk about the Malbec harvest before we launch into tasting the Next Reds. And then audience participation, we will want to hear what your favorite wine is today. And please use the chat feature to ask questions and to share any thoughts that you have about the wines as you're tasting them. We've got a little poll for you to get you warmed up on the interactive piece of this. And we'd be curious to hear how you first learned about Hafner Vineyard. So take a moment, exercise your mouse or finger pad, and please let us know how you first heard about us. One of the things that is that we're really grateful for is that Hafner patrons are a fun group and a communicative group. And we'll see that both in the virtual tasting this afternoon, but one of the ways that we experience that is every week we hear from someone, not just one, from several people each week who write or call who say, oh yeah, I had the Chardonnay at Bob Perkins' house, or oh my God, Stephanie Mel told me about your next red. So the word of mouth is tremendous and obviously very important. And there you go. The evidence substantiates what we experience here, which is people are talk about Hafner wines with their friends. And I would never be able to tell you how much we appreciate that. It has been, after the quality of the wine, it has been the single most important factor in our success. So thank you. So back to what I was starting to say, which is that the most important decision that a winemaker makes each year is when to pick. And it's part of the benefit of being so close to the vineyard, and Park will talk about that. But in Park's usual understated manner, he makes that decision look easy. It's not, and a lot is riding on it. So without further ado, Kate's gonna share a video with you that explains how Park makes a decision as to when to pick.
We thought it'd be fun to take you behind the curtain, as it were, and show you a little bit about how we prepare for harvest. And we will be specifically talking about harvest decisions, how we decide when to pick, and which criteria we use to base that on. So let's head out in the vineyard. Go. This year's growing season started off a bit early, and since we had a pretty warm summer and, as everybody knows, a pretty dry one, we've been anticipating an early harvest starting around the 25th of August. Obviously, it didn't come to fruition because now we're around the 27th. We're looking at perhaps starting to harvest on Monday, which would be the 30th. We've had a bit of a cool pattern in the last few weeks that's really slowed things down, but we're looking for some pretty warm weather today and tomorrow and maybe Sunday. But you can see the grapes are very close. They have a beautiful golden color. They're soft and they're very tasty. So I do predict that we'll be starting harvesting on Monday and with this Chardonnay, and we'll be done picking Chardonnay for us probably by the end of the week. As harvest approaches, we start sampling the grapes more frequently, usually every other day or every 3 days. David will go out and sample the grapes for sugar content, which is measured in degrees Brix. And Sarah and I will go out and taste the grapes, and then we'll compare notes those are two of the factors that play into our decision as to when to harvest. We also will look at the calendar and obviously look very closely at the weather coming up. But really the main criteria for me is flavor of the grapes.
Okay, so leading up to harvest, there's a decision to be made. When are the grapes ready to pick? Well, at the base of that, one objective measurement we can take is the sugar content. So here we've got a vine. This is the trunk. This is called the cordon. These arms going out to the side. Off the cordon you have spurs. Off the spurs you have shoots, and that's where the fruit grows. And what I'm gonna do is go through the vineyard, sampling from the morning sun side of the vine, in the adjacent row, the afternoon sun side of the vine. I take a few berries from clusters in the middle of the vine, a few berries from clusters in the middle of the cordon, and a few berries from clusters at the end of the cordon. That way, I'm getting a representative sample of all the different sections of the vine, which might have slightly different fruit or sugar content. Put it all together in the bag, crush it up, and then read it with the refractometer. We'll be right back. All right, so now I've collected a sample. While I've done this, Park and Sarah are out tasting. I'm gonna get this objective measurement. We'll compare it to their impressions of tasting and make a decision about harvest. So this is the refractometer. I've got this little lens here. I'm gonna pour a bit of juice on the lens, close the cover. And it looks like about 21.3. So that's 21.3 degrees Brix, which is a measurement of sugar. It relates to the sugar content by volume, and the number is approximately twice the volume of alcohol that you'll get in a finished wine. It's a nice, easy way to think about it.
We're out here in the house block of the Chardonnay, tasting fruit. We're probably just a few days from harvest. This time of year we taste fruit every other day, or even sometimes every day. And we're looking for the loss of green flavors and the development of ripe flavors. So for us it goes from tasting like green apples to more like apricots, pears, peaches,
melon.
The fruits takes on a beautiful golden color. It's no longer green and hard, and this is quite close.
Definitely. Yep.
This is Malbec, which is the first of our red varieties that we pick, and we pick it first for rosé, and then a week or so later we'll pick it for red wine. And you can see Malbec has very large berries, and although this year they seem to be smaller than normal, which bodes well for wine quality. They're already very soft, a beautiful blue hue, and they're tasting quite good. Malbec is the best of the eating grapes that we grow on the property. And we'll probably start picking this within a week or two of finishing Chardonnay. So maybe in 3 weeks we'll be picking for rosé, and then 4 weeks, which would put us near the end of September, for red wine. And then usually Cabernet is the last. Cabernet and Petit Verdot are the last two varieties we pick, usually around the middle of October to the end of October. And I suspect this year will be no different. So we are anxiously awaiting the approach of harvest, the start of harvest.
Thanks for joining us today. We hope you enjoyed the video about how we decide when to pick each year. This is, since we're focusing on our main Chardonnay and the next red wines today, we're starting with the main Chardonnay, and here is a map of our vineyard showing the main block that we use for our main Chardonnay, if that makes any sense. Anyway, this block was planted in 2003. It's clone 15. The other clone, main clone that we have on the property
that we use for the reserve Chardonnay and also for the main Chardonnay, if we need additional fruit, is Dijon Clone 76. The Clone 15 block is just under 11 acres, which means it's got around 10,000 vines or so.
I hope you've been enjoying the wine as we've been talking, and we're going to sort of do broad brush strokes here on the main Chardonnays from the 17 to the 18 and the 19. And I know that not everybody has opened, what is this, 7 bottles of wine. So, but those who have, fantastic, good job. So just broad strokes. When a wine starts out as a young wine, it's really fruit forward and fruit driven. For the 2017, which is 3 years old, or actually, wait, no, it's not. It's 4 years old. To me, it's surprisingly youthful. It has a really lovely fruit aromas of lime blossoms, a little pink grapefruit, and some white peaches. But you'll also notice the development, especially when you compare it to the 18 and 19. There's some really lovely development that's happening. There's still a little Bartlett pear in the mouth, but you get more the vanilla toastiness and the flintiness from the winemaking. So quickly onto the main Chardonnay.
The 2018?
The 2018 main Chardonnay. To me, it's really intensely floral. Pear blossoms and a little candied lemon peel. And then these, to me, the youthful quality carries through to the mouth. Unlike in the 17, you get more the vanilla toast versus, to me, this is really lovely and fruity on the palate, but it's beginning to develop that sort of toasted brioche, a little flint and vanilla cream. And then for the 19 main, it's just really quite lovely. It's bright and fruit forward, really nice tropical fruits, a little pink grapefruit, a little honeysuckle. And I know this sounds weird, but a little tangerine, you know, those really cute clementines that we like to eat. On the palate, I think it has a really nice Charentais melon quality and some of that Bartlett pear. And it's just beginning to develop that sweet vanilla toastiness. In terms of aging, I think the 19 is gonna, I mean, it's 3 years older, younger.
2 years younger.
2 years younger, and yet it's got some really lovely qualities that are just gonna age nicely in the next couple of years. Scott is going to come on and take a quick poll to see which of these 3 you enjoy more.
So Kate's gonna actually, there we go. We're curious what you find in the wine. As Sarah and Park said, they shared what they find in these 3 Chardonnays, but everybody actually is an expert. So what do you find? And we'd be curious, and you can check off as many as you notice. We got a photograph from a patron just before we started the virtual tasting, and they were ready, and they had actually all the wines set out. So we're gathering as a family, and we love that. We also invite you, and I'm very glad to see that this is happening, that patrons, people with us today are sharing their thoughts in the chat, much to our enjoyment, but I also think to the enjoyment of other people who are participating. And we may be having some small technical difficulties.
No.
Here's-
I'm just letting them have the time to taste through them and
This
fill
is
in
the
the
power behind
answers.
the curtain.
No, what I was going to say is while you're doing that, just if you have other thoughts and you want to share things in the chat, just make sure that you share them with everyone. And so when you click, there's a little drop down, it says share with everyone or share just with hosts and panelists. So we've been seeing great things, thank you. But I think everyone wants to see them. So just make sure of that. And if you have questions you want answered, put those in the Q&A. That's what we'll look through when we get to the Q&A at the end.
This is testimony to making sure that you always have the younger generation close at hand anytime that you have an electrical appliance or anything technological. I'm not sure where we would be without the younger generation. And another generation coming behind them who will perform that also. So wonderful. Well, this is fascinating. Pear, vanilla, grapefruit, melon. So you're all going to get high marks from Sarah and Park on your sensory evaluation. In just a moment, Park is going to share a video. Kate's going to share a video of how the Malbec harvest is going. This morning, in fact, right here, Park and Sarah and Ricardo and Adam, we're busy crushing Petit Verdot. So we're in the midst of harvest and kind of Howard Cosell at ringside level of activity. But in the meantime, we would suggest that you start to transition from the Chardonnay to the next red so that you can taste some of the nuances of aging and start to develop your own opinion as to which of those vintages are your favorite, because we want to hear that. So without further ado, Kate is going to put up the next video.
Well, good morning and welcome to the first day of the 2021 Chardonnay harvest at Hafner Vineyard. Well, as the sun is coming up over Alexander Valley, we're getting a beautiful shot here of the machine harvester at work. So this is a 2015 Palenque harvester, and you can see one of my colleagues, Benito, there riding on the top of the machine. Here it is picking our Clone 15 Chardonnay. Walking behind the machine there is another of my colleagues, that's Gerardo. And he's just keeping an eye on things and making sure the machine's doing a good job picking cleanly and not breaking the vines. Hey, Hera. And here we can see the beauty of the sorting system at work. The grapes get separated from the vine, and using a conveyor system, they're brought up to the top of the machine where they go through this sorting system, similar to the system that we use at the winery. And here we can see, if we look over the vineyard, there's the winery in the distance. A beautiful day of picking. Throughout my career, I've seen a number of different scenarios for harvesting grapes and getting them to the winery, and I have to say that our system here at Hafner, not only is it unique in my experience, but
it allows us to get the crop off of the vine into one of these gondolas and to the winery in no more than 15 or 20 minutes. This allows us to preserve freshness unlike any system I've seen before. Oftentimes grapes are picked, they go into one vessel or another, and they have to be trucked to the winery. Sometimes it can take hours before the fruit makes its way into a press. With our system, like I say, it's no more than 15 or 20 minutes, which is a real benefit to the freshness of the wine. While the machine is doing its job, the rest of the crew is busy harvesting end vines. The machine doesn't do a great job with the vines at the ends of the rows. Here's our supervisor, Sapanas. Good boy. In order to get the grapes picked in the same amount of time, we would probably need a crew of 40 or 50 people. And even still, the grapes wouldn't be processed as timely as what the machine harvester can deliver for us.
Okay, well, just like that, we finish up the first day of picking. That right back there is a full gondola. That's 8 on the day. We were shooting for around 20 tons today. Came in a little light with the first 4. Hopefully I made it up with the last one. And just like that, the first day is over with. I'm gonna take these to the winery now.
Okay, this is a load of Chardonnay grapes that we're just receiving. You can see Ricardo is going to de-juice some of the, going to pull off some of the juice that's in the gondola there first before the grapes then go through the fruit sorter and then into the press. This is one of our 2 stainless steel gondolas that we pick grapes into. This one empties by tilting and shaking, so the grapes are gently shaken out of the gondola and into the fruit sorter. So we harvest our grapes by machine, and the machine tends to leave most of the stems on the vine and just pick the individual berries. But if any whole clusters come through, or we have to hand pick the end vines always because the machine doesn't pick those, as the clusters go through the machine, the berries are separated from the stems. Everything drops onto this table of rollers. The stems bounce along the top and go into the screw here that's the waste screw. The berries fall through the rollers and then are pumped into the press. Red pump there is now pumping mainly the berries and a little bit of juice that remains of them through that 3-inch hose and into our press, which is where the juice is ultimately separated from the skins. The juice that comes out of the press is pretty cloudy, and we want to start fermentation of the Chardonnay with a relatively clear juice. So we'll settle the juice overnight in these temperature-controlled stainless steel tanks. The following day, we'll rack or pump the clear juice off of the sediment and then add yeast to get fermentation started. For our main Chardonnay, about half of that juice is fermented in the French tradition in barrels out in our caves, and about half of it is fermented in the California tradition in stainless steel tanks, temperature controlled. So we're going to head out into the caves and take a look at some of the barrels that are out there and hear how we track the fermentation on a day-to-day basis.
One of the fun things about my job is I get to check every fermentation, the rate at which it's going, and I get to taste every lot and make sure it's all tasting great. Right now, what I'm doing is I'm checking the temperature. I do it in centigrade. It's 19.5. I check the centigrade because if it's above 20, we add points. If it's below, we subtract, and that affects the fermentation. So now I'm testing the bricks, which is the amount of sugar. This hydrometer is for the end of fermentation. The first hydrometer is for the beginning. And I read through the meniscus, and I see that it's, let's see, 1.1. So it has probably another 3 or 4 days of fermentation. And I get to taste, which is always fun. And at the end of fermentation, there isn't the bright fruit. The beginning of fermentation, which is the best. I love it when it's just starting to ferment because it's bubbly and it has really lovely tropical fruit and mangoes and peaches. Now, because it's being fermented in a barrel, I get sort of a toasted nuts and still a little melon quality. Cheers.
Once fermentation is finished in both the barrels and the tanks, the wine just ages for the subsequent 9 or 10 months, and then will be bottled the following July and August. And then it's held for about 14 months in the bottle before we release it to patrons and restaurants.
We hope you enjoyed that short video about the Chardonnay harvest. And we're going to move on now to the next red, which is our Malbec-based red wine. We started the Malbec program in 2004 after we planted some Malbec to blend with the Cabernet, and decided we would make a second red wine that was Malbec based, and it's usually around 80 to 85% Malbec now, the balance being Cabernet and Petit Verdot. We have 3 blocks of Malbec on the property. The 2 that are circled are the main blocks that we use for the red wine program. And Clone 4 is, looks like one of the blocks, and the other one is 598 clone. So you can see there the years in which they were planted and the approximate acreage and vine count we have in each block. Here are a few photographs of what goes on during the Malbec harvest. The one, just a quick run through the top, starting on the top from the left to right. That's a cluster of Malbec. If you were to walk out in the vineyard, it would be very easy to identify Malbec because the berries are significantly larger than the Petit Verdot or Cabernet, the only other 2 red grape varieties we grow on the property. The next photograph shows the machine harvester at work in there. Pretty much harvest just like you saw for the Chardonnay. There's the crew at the end of the Malbec harvest. There's a tractor with grapes. There's me doing a pump over, which is what we have to do during red wine fermentation. We ferment the juice with the skins because the color is actually contained in the skins, and a lot of the flavor is there as well. So we pump the juice and the skins into the fermentation tanks, add yeast to get fermentation started. One of the byproducts of fermentation is carbon dioxide gas, and as that bubbles up through the fermenting juice, it becomes trapped in the skins, causing the skins to float to the top of the tank, forming what's known as the cap. So we do pump overs. We'll draw fermenting juice out of the bottom of the tank and pump it over and sprinkle it on the cap so it can then percolate down through the skins and extract the color and flavor we're looking for. There's a photograph of, again, the vibrating gondola discharging fruit into the fruit sorter, and then another photograph of Sarah tracking the fermentation in the Malbec. We're going to, let's see, a few more photos there. I think we covered pretty much all of it. At the end of fermentation, we will drain the wine out of the tank, which is what I'm doing in the photograph there on the bottom. And then we will rake or hoe the skins out of the tank and press those skins because they contain a little bit of wine. Then that wine is settled overnight, and the next day it is racked to barrels, and it will undergo a second fermentation while it's being aged in our caves. Second fermentation being malolactic fermentation, which is a bacterial fermentation that converts the grape's natural malic acid to the softer lactic acid. We are tasting 4 vintages of Next Red here today. We hope that, that you have them. And if you don't, well, at least you can follow along and hear what our chief taster here, Sarah, finds in each of these wines and how they differ by vintage and age.
So for me, the descriptor I have for Malbec is cola. Think of a Coke can. You open it and that first aroma of that spritz coming out, that to me is sort of cola spice. And I think Malbec really has a lot of that. That's its classic, for me, characteristic. On the 2010, I get sort of a little dried cherries, some mint, a little violets, and blackberries, along with those cola aromas. On the palate, let me taste it. I sort of get black pepper, freshly ground black pepper, a little carpaccio, juniper berries, and that lovely vanilla toast from aging in oak. And for me, it has a really long, chewy finish, which I think is really lovely right now. Park and I have a tendency to drink our wines older. We like them with a little bit of age on them, and I think the 2010 is tasting really nicely. For the 2011, I still get that bright cola aroma and a little briar. So we have blackberries near our house, and when we go to pick them and you're stepping on the ends of the berry bushes to get those good berries inside, that's the aroma that I'm talking about. And a little violets and some forest floor. Think about hiking in Armstrong Woods. It's a really lovely aroma. I don't know if you noticed on our slide about the 10, 11, 14, 17, but 11 was a year when it was very cold all throughout the year. And so for me, it doesn't have as bright a fruit quality as the 10 and the 14 and the 17. Even though the harvest dates aren't that different, it is the latest one that we have. And the season, unlike France, our growing seasons are pretty easy. We don't typically have rain at all. But that's not so vintages are not as crucial, although the 11 is demonstrating the impact of the weather on the wine. For the 2014, I get really bright cola, a little fraise de bois, you know, those little wild strawberries, and with some blueberries, a bit of violets and nutmeg and cassis. To me, it's just sort of beginning to hit its stride. And on the, excuse me, on the palate, I get Picholine olives, you know, those little green ones, and some oyster shell. Playing bocce at a friend's house reminded me of that aroma, and some really lovely toasty oak flavors. The 2017, especially when you compare it to the 2010, seems just sort of young and...
This is our current release, too.
Right. It's young and complex, but it doesn't have all the development that is in the 2010. But for me, I get a little juniper berry, a little lavender and violets, and of course that cola that I just love. For me, the entry is lovely. It's very, very soft and round and rich on the palate. And like the 2017, it has those Picholine olives and a little Carpaccio and some dry, some bittersweet chocolate and a little cinnamon toast. You can tell I like to eat. So I hope you've enjoyed the quick run through of the wines. Scott's going to come down and ask you again, which is your favorite. So enjoy.
So again, we're curious, there you go, what you find in the next red. These are some of the descriptors that Park and Sarah mentioned. And then, you know, in the chat featured, feel free to add other aromas or flavors that may not be listed. One of the things that we really enjoy about this kind of tasting, vertical tasting, is not only you know, seeing how older vintages are doing, and perhaps vintages that you've been keeping in your cellar for some time, but it's also an opportunity to try the younger vintage, the newly released wine, and have a sense of where it's going to go. And this is something that we enjoy doing here at the winery, and we do with guests who visit here. And it's fairly unique. I mean, there's some other wineries that do this, but it's not broadly done. So again, A+ on the sensory evaluation. Clearly the spicy component of the Malbec is resonating with all of you, as well as the cola and blueberries. And who doesn't like chocolate, particularly if you can find it in the wine, or just enjoying it while you're tasting the wine. Here we wanted to get a sense of these 7 wines that we tasted, and granted, you may not have been tasting all of them, but we're just curious, what's your favorite one right now? And who knows, after you have dinner and enjoy the wines, your opinion may change. You are entitled to change your opinion as often as you like, but we're curious right now, what is resonating with you? Which is your favorite? you can't hear this, but there's music, you know, like from the Jeopardy game show in the background. And it'll be, there we go. Huh. Yeah, well, this is, it's not unsurprising that on the Chardonnay, the 2018 is the one that is gaining the most applause. The 2019 is still young and very fresh, fruit forward, as Park and Sarah said. But you know, with another year, our Chardonnays very much open, and there are different. There's just more accessibility a year later, and on the next reds, it's pretty evenly spaced between the oldest wines from the wine library, the 2010 and 2011, and the most recent vintage. The next reds, one of the things that was really fun when Park began to make Next Red was it provided a context, not just for the Next Red, but for the Cabernet, because all of a sudden we were comparing two red wines that we made from grapes grown here in our vineyard. And the Next Red is, we describe it as being a little more user-friendly, a little more accessible. The Cabernet is leaner, a little more structured, elegant, and it's just fun having two different red wines for us to make, and having two different red wines for you to enjoy. So the magician behind the screen has arrived for the Q&A function, for the Q&A session. Take it away.
Okay, so thank you for all the questions that have been coming forward in the Q&A and all the chatting that's been happening. We'll just sort of start at the top, and we probably won't get to all of them, but feel free to start asking some more. And my mom, Sarah, will be upstairs, and the ones that we don't get to, she'll be responding to as well. So someone was asking just about the Chardonnays and their ageability, and in particular, you know, compared to the 16 Chardonnay or even older than that, what's the optimal year range to enjoy the wines?
Well, I'll address that. The party line here is that we feel people can enjoy our Chardonnays for 5 years from the vintage year, in other words, the date on the bottle, with the caveat, which is a big caveat, that everybody's tastes are different. So if you like a younger Chardonnay, by all means drink it then. If you like it a little more developed, a little older, we would encourage you to hold onto it a little bit longer. We've been enjoying a lot of 2016 Chardonnay of late, and to me it's lovely. It's not as fruity and youthful as it was obviously when it was initially released, but has a lot of complexity, a lot of flintiness that Sarah and I really love.
One of the things that we hear from you, from our patrons often, is someone will say, oh, I was organizing my wine cellar and oh my God, I found a case of this Chardonnay, and or I found a bottle of this Chardonnay. And sometimes it's a very old Chardonnay, you know, 10, 12 years old. And they say, what should we do? And the answer is always the same. Well, hopefully enjoy it, and you'll never know until you pull the cork. But most of the time, it is a delightful surprise. If you have a deep cellar, there's sometimes a value to just setting a bottle aside and trying it a couple years later than you might normally.
Okay. Someone was asking about the harvesting of with the machine harvester. Does it leave any grapes on the vines? And, you know, how do you sort of mitigate that?
When we adjust the machine for each individual block, my goal is to leave a few berries on every vine, because if you're stripping all the berries off, you may be a little rougher on the vines than you absolutely need to be. So there's, for me, there's a balance between the two. But there have been several studies done, hand-picked versus machine-picked, and machine picking tends to pick the vines cleaner, because when you're hand-picking and the guys are usually being paid by how much they pick. They grab all the easiest clusters, something that's interlocked in a bunch of canes often gets left for obvious reasons. The machine doesn't differentiate, it picks everything. So there's very little left on the vine once we run the machine through the vineyard.
Okay. And someone was also asking, had eagle eyes and noticed the different corks that we have. So the 18 and 19 Chardonnays would have the Diam, the technical corks, as would the 17 next red, and just wondering what the shift is about. You can speak to it, but you can also go onto our blog and check out, there's an article that dives deeper into this that Dad wrote when we first launched them, but maybe you can just speak to them.
Sure. We've been using natural corks for many, many years, ever since '82, our first vintage. We have looked at alternatives throughout the time, and we haven't found anything that we thought was a better replacement for natural corks until Diam came along. Diam is made by grinding up natural corks, cleaning them, and putting them back together. And the reason we're looking at these is twofold. One is corkiness in the wine, which has gotten less and less throughout the years, but it's still can occur from time to time when you have chlorine, moisture, and mold growth on the corks before they're punched and made into corks, which can give a mustiness to the wine that obviously we don't like. The Diam corks are cleaned in such a way that it removes any possibility of that occurring. The other thing is that we've noticed, especially with older wines, and we like to hold our wines longer, that they don't, each bottle does not age exactly the same as the next bottle. And that's because the cork is a natural product. Each cork is slightly different. It allows some allows a little more air in than others. So the Diam, because they're a technical or manufactured cork, if you will, they're much more consistent. The ageability is much greater, or the consistency when we age the wine it's much greater, and we're very happy about having made the change a couple of years ago.
Okay, let me just see. We received a good question by email beforehand, which is, let me see. It said, I want to buy some wine from my child's birth year. How do I do that?
It's easy. Just call us. Patrons have been doing this for a long time. And what makes most sense is to purchase Cabernet Magnums from the birth year. Chardonnay and Reserve Chardonnay might age that long, but Cabernet is a much better bet. We release the Cabernet Magnums normally in their 10th year. So your children will be 10 years old, and they're out of their terrible twos and tiresome threes and so forth, and you'll be loving them. And buy them and store them in your cellar for 11 years, or we're happy to do that here. And patrons have done this for their kids, for their 21st birthday, for their bar mitzvahs, any number of family milestones.
And I was a lucky recipient of it, but Uncle Scott opened on the day before, or the 2 days before our wedding, a double magnum from my birth year, and the night before our wedding, my dad opened one from my husband's birth year. So, you know, it's just such a special thing for kids to be able to open something from the year that they're born. So as a child, or as an adult child now, I highly encourage it. How do you decide how much Petit Verdot and Cabernet to blend in? And in 2011, can you speak to whether, if you had any thoughts on adding more Petit Verdot, what element does that add to the next red?
Each year, the next red is an intentional blend. So we will sit down, look at what we've done in previous years as a starting point, and then we'll also, you know, add more, add less Cabernet on either side of kind of the average and see where it takes us. And in the 2011, as Sarah mentioned, it was a cool year. So we, I think in the 2011, the Petit Verdot percentage was a little bit higher than normal, probably so that we could bump up the structure a little bit more on that wine. But the Cabernet for us tends to add some tannin structure and some elegance that the Malbec doesn't have. The Petit Verdot is just a lot of color, a lot of tannin structure. So usually the Petit Verdot is added in a pretty modest percentage, 2 to 5%. Usually the Cabernet can be up to 15%, something like that.
Okay, let's see. Good questions. Okay. All right, so we had one. It says, do you ever have personal tastings of wines that are past their peak? And if so, what did you learn? Should we, let's see. We have well-stored Cabernets that date back to the 1990s, and should we taste them or keep them for some collector's sale? So I guess the question is, you know, have you ever come across a wine that you wish you'd enjoyed earlier? And how are sort of the 90s tasting?
Well, sure, I'm happy to answer that. Scott may want to add something to it. Definitely every year we do vertical tastings, so we can describe the wines, put them on the website, and we intentionally go, in the case of the Chardonnays, beyond where we think that they're really showing their best. For me as a winemaker, it's really important to try these older wines, see what happens when they get beyond their peak, beyond, you know, what people might feel is their prime. But again, we tend to enjoy older wines, and they're different, especially red wines. We taste them back into the 80s still and enjoy them for what they are. They're not youthful, they're not fruity, but they're very soft, they're very velvety, elegant, just a different experience.
Yeah, and this is a question that comes up on the phone with some frequency, and it's a little bit of a balancing act. You know, there's something really special when you pull an older vintage out of your cellar to share with family and friends. And you've been at parties where the host has done that, and you feel honored, you know, that they went to that trouble. But you can't hold wine too long. One of the best things, you know, if you're purchasing a case of Cabernet or a case of Next Red, I suggest that, you know, people they try a bottle within the first 6 months. And if they feel that it's too young, closed in and tight, don't try another bottle for another 6 months or 12 months. That's the best way to kind of monitor the aging of a wine and calibrate it to your taste, which is actually the only thing that's important, is how you enjoy it. You know, there's a certain, all of us defer to older people. You know, when you're going into the bank and there's an old gentleman that's making his way to the door, you give him the benefit of the doubt and you let him go first. I think when people open an older wine, they're just happy that it's older, and there's a certain deference. So it may not be perfect, but I think it's special. And it's, you know, and it's part of the reason that we make a concerted effort to have older vintages available.
Okay. I know we're sort of running out of time, so I wanted to ask one last question. And before I go, actually it's 2 questions and 2 to Uncle Scott. Scott mentioned that we were harvesting just this morning. And for those of you, I know many of you have been here before, you know this is the cellar. So I just have to give a shout out to Dad and Mom and Ricardo for cleaning up the cellar so fast and letting us use your active workspace as our studio. And so you can see a real behind the scenes. So thank you, and thank you for tuning in. 2 questions came in by email. One was, do we have any Next Red Magnums? And 2, what would you serve with your Thanksgiving dinner?
So whoever asked the question about Next Red Magnums, thank you in particular. You're prescient. This is the first year that we'll be releasing Magnums of Next Red. It's the 2014 vintage that we tasted today. They'll be released in the holiday offering that will be mailed to you in about 3 weeks, which is when we always release Magnums. And this is also the time of year when we release double Magnums of the Cabernet. I'm happy to take a stab at Thanksgiving dinner, and Park can add to this. I think Thanksgiving is a wonderful time when there's a lot of people who are together and a lot of different tastes. And the menu can be very traditional or very eclectic. And I always enjoy rosé with Thanksgiving dinner. I also enjoy Chardonnay, the main Chardonnay. But I've had Thanksgiving dinners where people are serving Gewürztraminer and other things that are a little more off the beaten track. Starting the evening with sparkling wine. And it's also an opportunity to try a lot of different wines, because oftentimes you have a big crowd and everybody can get a taste. I don't know what you might add to that.
Yeah, we usually enjoy a bottle, maybe a Magnum, because we're gathered with a family of our reserve Chardonnay, and often there's a bottle or 2 of Pinot Noir, which we don't make, but which we love, and I think goes well with turkey also. So, but of course it's up to personal preference.
We want to thank you for joining us today. We're so conscious that we are fortunate to operate our business in the midst of this wonderful community of people who appreciate Hafner wine. It's, I think all of us here feel like we've got the best jobs in the world. I know that I do, and being connected with people on the phone or by email, it just adds a lot of meaning. So we wanted to thank you for being with us. this afternoon, and look forward to the next opportunity to taste with you. And perhaps in the not too distant future, we'll be able to do that in person. So here's to you. Cheers. Cheers. Take care.